Okay, we're going to talk about some ports. We're just going to go over, a lot of us have already done dressings, but we're just going to hit some highlights on it. And again, we're not going to actually perform the whole thing just because it's we don't have that much time. But whenever you have a port in, we just want to make sure that before you de-access it, these dressings are only good for 7 days. Sometimes the dressings get changed within those 7 days, so it's real important to go into the Epic and find out when it was last accessed. And it should be re-accessed every 7 days. Even though the dressing was just done a couple of days ago, it needs to be re-accessed every 7 days. The important thing is to remember is if you are de-accessing a port, you have to make sure that you put heparin in the line before you de-access it. We would hate to de-access the port and the port actually get clotted off, and then they'd have to go back to surgery and get a new port. So make sure you put a heparin, lock in there. We like to use 100 units per ml. You can use 5 mLs for our kids, and simply just put it in there, and then you can de-access the port. So we're going to assume we put in the heparin, 100 units per ml, 5 mLs, and we will de-access the port using my gloves and all standard precautions. But the stuff is too sticky, so it's hard to use gloves on this guy. Anyways, so de-accessing a port, if you haven't de-accessed it before, if you're simply pulling it out, it's painful for the kids. There is a little hook right here that makes it easier. If you just hold down the sides and pull up on this, it'll lock and the port will be taken out easily, and it's not as painful for the kids. Okay, so after we de-access, some kids may need EMLA, but if they're nice and sedated and you've given them a bolus before you de-access, it's easy to re-access right away. The other thing is you will not de-access if they have epi, norepi, any kind of vasoactive drips that requires us to not re-access every 7 days. So just remember that. If they have those drips running, you don't have to re-access. You will need to do a dressing change, but again, you need to be real careful doing a dressing change. You'll be just removing the biopatch, cleaning around and putting the biopatch back and dressing it, but not re-accessing. So when we re-access, the things that we want to remember for re-access is we look at the size. The gauges, we want to pretty much use 19 to 20 gauge needles, and the reason for that is a lot of these kids are coming in and needing a lot of blood taken from them. So if we put a smaller needle in, we could possibly clog this port. So we don't want to do that. So standard, try to use a 19 or 20. Sometimes you'll find these kids come up from the ED and they'll have a 22 gauge in. And if you know they're going to need a lot of blood draws, a lot of infusion, a lot of fluids, it's better just to change the needle then. If you don't think they're going to be doing that, you can leave the 22 in. But if you're just accessing a new port, try to get a 19 or 20 gauge. That's mostly what we carry anyways. What's important for us is knowing the length of it. You can get that from the parents, you can get that from the chart, and that's real important for accessing. So I've got my port needle. This has been primed. Again, this is all done sterilely. And I like to use the biopatch. People use a different way. I like to put the biopatch in first, hold the sides, remove the plastic, and feel for the port. There is 2 kinds of ports, and I'll get to that in a minute. But you'll put your fingers around the port, use your pointer finger to feel the center, and go in as a 90-degree angle into the port. Make sure you're not going into the same hole that you were already in. If the patient has anything like a bacteria or something on there and you go through that same hole, you could be putting it into their port. So make sure you find another hole when you re-access it. As you can see, I've picked up the wrong needle. It's not very stable. It's too long. I accidentally, in the Pyxis, unfortunately, we have a bin that says maybe 20 gauge, 1 inch, but they're not always right. And I accidentally picked up the wrong one and now it's too big. So what we can do is we really don't want to de-access this port for this kid. You just make him more upset. And so what we can do is put another bio patch underneath this and build it up to keep it more stable. I don't have another bio patch right now, but you can put a couple bio patches. Don't put any gauze there because again, it'll have to be changed in 48 hours. What you'll do is you make sure you remove this plastic piece, and this has been used a lot so it kind of falls down. Remove the plastic piece, and in the kits they usually come with a standard Tegaderm, but what we like to use is right next to our dressing kit we have a larger Tegaderm, and it keeps the port from tenting too much. So if you can get the larger Tegaderm when you get your central line kit, it'll be a lot nicer for the kids. It's not that much bigger, but it definitely is nicer for a port. So you'll put this larger Tegaderm on. And I never just put a dressing completely on. I usually start at one side and just go all the way around. And then have my other person hold up the line, and then cross these legs. It's like what we'd like to say. And then always make sure you kind of follow your path of when you're taking off this piece of paper here to make sure it stays down. That'll help after you've used your skin prep and all that stuff, but that'll help hold that down. And another key thing with all lines is make sure that you're lifting the line. Have somebody hold that line up all the way like that and put that little strip closest to the line so it occludes everything. And as you can see, there's nothing there. I like to put another one just on top just to make sure. Last thing I want this kid to do is get an infection. So I put it on one side, kind of pinch it, and put the other side, and do it like that. Again, I should have had another bio patch on there, but for the sake of the video, I don't have that. And I think that's it. Oh, power ports. So there's two different kinds of ports. You've got a standard port, which is round, and you've got a power port, which is triangular and has these three little knobby things. You can feel it. Usually the power ports are kind of small, and you can usually feel it. If you can't feel it, the x-ray can always tell you if it's a power port. It'll show the triangle shape. The reason why you would have to know that is a power port's important if the patient's coming in and they're going to need a lot of contrast for CT scan. You want to, if you have a power port, you can use it for contrast. If you don't have a power port, you can't use it for contrast. And you want to make sure that if you're going to use it for contrast and you're going to use this power port, that you get the correct needle with the correct type of tubing. This tubing is not contrast or power port compatible if you're going to use contrast. So you can use this tubing in a power port, but if you're going to put contrast through it, you can't use this one. It would be the blue tubing. Needle size and length would all be the same, but the tubing is blue for the contrast. And that's when you would use it for the power port. But if the patient's just simply coming in and they don't think any kind of contrast is going to be needed for sure, then you can just use a regular one. And I think that's it.